Today's daf we're going to be learning is Gittin daf Yud. It's the daf for Shavuot. We're going to start at the top of the daf with a quick review of yesterday's daf. What we saw was we started with our Mishna on daf Tet, and our Mishna said that there's someone who brings a get from the dina. Actually, I want to talk about the second part. Okay, both get nashim and shichror avadim, the document to release a slave, are the same, meaning that they have to say when they bring it. Now, then we said this is different from other shtarot, and we saw a braita that said that there's three things that get nashim and shichror avadim are similar and different from other shtarot. So we have molichu mevi, bringing the get and saying b'fanai nechtam. We have any get that has an aid kuti pasul, an aid kuti is disqualified, other than the get nashim and shichror avadim, and specifically the other direction, which is if it was done in a non-Jewish court, it's not accepted for get and shichror eved for the slave being released, but it is good for all other documents. Then Rabbi Meir added a fourth and said, if you say, give this get to my wife or the shtar to my eved, and the messenger hasn't gotten there yet, he can change his mind about it. That's another one where it's different from other documents, that once they're written and signed, that's it. So now we try to understand, we had a question, aren't there other cases? And the last question we were up to was, what about lishma? Why isn't lishma an example? To which we said, according to Rabbi, that is the example, the first example. Molichu maybe is because of the halacha of lishma. Then we said, but according to Rava, who doesn't think the issue is lishma, so why isn't that listed? So then we suggested maybe this only lists rabbinic and not Torah laws. And then we had a problem because we said, okay, now we're going to actually go to a new problem, starting from the top of our daf, the very end of the first line. But the last case Rabbi Meir added about changing your mind, that's a Torah law. If you haven't given the get yet and you change your mind, you can change your mind. That's a Torah law. And yet it appears here, so you can't say it's all rabbinic. So therefore they reject that possibility and they give a different answer. Elaki katane milta de leta bekidushin. Milta de ita bekidushin lo katane. What it's referring to on this list are only things that don't exist in parallel in a document of kiddushin. What is a document of kiddushin? We do kiddushin with a ring. That's because you can get betrothed with money, that's a ring which has monetary value, with having sexual relations, we don't really do anymore, and the rabbis definitely didn't approve of that. And there's a whole thing there. I'm not going to get into that right now, away from Masechet Kiddushin. And then with a document, you can give a document to a woman, a man give a document and say, with this document, I betroth you, okay, instead of giving her the ring. Comes to a shtar Kiddushin, these three things don't apply. Okay, the question is why? We'll see this in a minute. And then they're going to say, so milta de'ita b'kiddushin lo katani, things that apply in the same way to a shtar kiddushin aren't on this list. So then they say, but wait. Okay, so before we get there, let's go through the list and let's go through the things and why they don't exist. B'fanei neftam, and Rashi helps us out with this. In the middle of the Rashi, elaki katani milta de'ita b'kiddushin, if you drop down 10 lines, he says, ditakante de Rabbanan ba'al mihi b'gitin. This is just for Gittin. And why do you have to do this in Gittin? Because we're worried that if you don't say b'fanai nechtam, what might happen? The husband might come later and claim that the document is a forged document, it's not valid, and she'll have no way to prove it. And, right, because he'll say it wasn't lishma, or he'll say, or, whatever, all those issues we said. And he might disqualify the get, and then she'll be married to someone else, and he'll come and disqualify. So therefore, we said you have to say to preclude the husband from doing that. But that is not true for kiddushin, because if he would claim they're not married, well, then she's free to marry other people, right? There's no motivation that he's going to come and say we're not really married. Okay, it's not like such a concern like he might come and say we're really not divorced. When it comes to the egg kuti, this egg kuti is no good and it's only unique for Gittin. And that we're going to see later because we're going to learn today that the witnesses in a get don't sign one without the other. And because of that, one egg kuti is going to be okay because there's going to be another Jew with him and the Jew wouldn't sign unless the kuti knew what he was doing. We'll get to all that later. I don't want to ruin the punchline of the next sugya. Then we have the last one, which is the erkaot of the Gentiles, which is right in a court. So now, we're going to explain this also later, that it's when there's Eidei Mesira. It only works when there's Eidim that saw the get. Then we can rely on these erka'otiv to the Gentiles. And that's because we hold like Rabbi Elazar, the Eidim Mesira Karte, and the signatures are not as critical. But that's not, when it comes to Kiddushin, she's going to be betrothed even if there aren't Eidim Mesira. There, the Eidim are just verifying that something happened, but it happens even without the Eidim. Whereas the get, the Eidim Mesira is what makes the get a get. He gives a get, nobody sees, it's not really a valid get. It has to have the Eidei Mesira. That's what makes it the get. So therefore, those halachot are all unique for the shtar of a get, not true for a shtar of kiddushin. And that's what this listed. But now the Gemara is going to ask, well, wait a minute. The ha chazara gufa ita b'kiddushin. But what do you mean? Chazara, he could change his mind about, what about the Rabbi Meir case? That's a case of, right? He could change his mind. And he could also change his mind about with marriage. He could write a shtar kiddushin until she gets it. He can change his mind about it. So that would reject this theory that this isn't discussing things that would apply to a shtar kiddushin. To which the Gemara says, no, b'shlichu ba'al korcha, u'b'gerushin ita, u'b'kiddushin leita. There is a difference in the shlichut between marriage and divorce. When it comes to marriage, if a man sends a messenger to betroth the woman, and the woman doesn't want to get married, there's no marriage because the woman has to agree to the marriage. Kiddushin can only happen with the consent of both sides. Get, according to Torah law, this was changed in later history by Rabbeinu Gershom, thankfully, that a woman also has to agree to a get. But by Torah law, as long as the get is received by her, doesn't matter if she wants it or not, he can give it to her against her will. So if he sends a messenger and the messenger can give it against his will, then theoretically, you might think that then it's enough that he just gave it to the messenger, or maybe he can't change his mind about it. So here, this is a unique halacha, shlichut ba'al korcha. Shlichut would only work against her will in a get, but shlichut against her will won't work with a shtar kiddushin. So you could say, again, it's a little bit tricky, but you could say that the shlichut that they were talking about in the Mishna here, on the Breita, the Rabbi Meir mentioned this case, if you say, give this get to my wife, it's against her will. And that's not an applicable case in Kiddushin because that case wouldn't exist in Kiddushin where you would give it against her will. And then again, you might think like that part of the Chiddush of Rabbi Meir is since she could get it against her will, maybe, you can't be choser, but you can't change your mind, but you actually can. Comes the Mishnah, new Mishnah. Now we're really keeping within the same topic because again, what happened? We quoted the Mishnah with the first similarity between get nashim and shikra avadim. Then we went to a Breita in the Gemara, which quoted 3 similarities, and then the 4th of Rabbi Meir. Now we're going to go through the other 2 similarities that Tanakama holds. Whole get sheyesh alav eid kuti pasul. Any get that has an aid who's a kuti, who's one of these shomronim that we talked about, that it is disqualified. Chutz migitei nashim v'shichrei avadim. It works only in a case of a get of a woman and release of a slave, or Canaanite slave. Now, it sounds like if it has one egg kuti, it's no good. If it has one, in other cases, but it will be good, one egg kuti in a case of a woman getting a divorce and the slave. There was a case now. Now, usually the case is coming to prove the situation, the halacha. They brought a get before Rabban Gamliel in Kfarot. In other words, there was a case they brought before Rabban Gamliel with a get that was given to a woman in Kfarot tonight. And the witnesses were Kutim. Notice it says witnesses, which sounds like 2 witnesses. Armish should sound like it was only saying 1 witness, but all of a sudden it says 2 witnesses. And he said it was okay. That's a little strange. We're going to have to figure out what's the connection between the story and the halacha. But first, the Gemara has a different question, which is Mane Manitin. Who does this Mishnah go according to? Lo Tanakama, v'lo Rabbi Elazar, v'lo Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Doesn't seem to follow any of the 3 opinions we're going to see right now in a Mishnah, in a Breita. Sorry. So the Breita says, Ditana. This is all about how we perceive Kutim. So remember, the Kutim were displaced by the Assyrians in the exile of the Israelite kingdom. They get moved to Shomron, to the capital of the Israelite kingdom, and they all start dying by lions, killing them, attacking them. And then we have this whole debate. What do we do with them? Do we treat them as Gerei Hamet? Are they true converts? Are they Gerei Arayot? Are they forced into it and they're not really Jews? Wherever you kind of fall in this debate, or maybe this is only according to one side of the debate, but the question is really, how do we view, do they keep halacha, right? They definitely had a different tradition than us. right? They went much more by the oral Torah by the written Torah because they didn't have the same oral traditions as us. But in any case, the question is, do they keep halacha or not? So there's a three-way machloket here about how to deal with them in a halachic sense. Ditan, matzat kuti. Like, for example, let's say you get a matzah from a kuti. Can you trust it? Can you eat it on Pesach? Muteret v'adam yotzeh b'yidei chavato b'Pesach. Tanakama says no problem. They keep those laws. Rabbi Elazar osir. He's on the other extreme. He says no way, no how. They're not very careful about mitzvot. They don't keep them the way we do. Rashbag has the middle position. Rashbag omel. Rashbag says something very fascinating. When they keep mitzvot, they keep them sometimes even better than the Jews do. Okay? They don't keep all the mitzvot, but the ones they do, they keep well. So now, let's try to figure out which our Mishnah holds them. The fact that we accept one witness who's a Kuti in Gittin and Shiur Avadim, but we don't accept it in another shtarot, doesn't seem to match any of the opinions, although maybe it does. I don't know. Manu, let's go through. Who is this? Tanakama, afilu shtar shtarot nami. Tanakama says you can eat their matzah. Obviously, they're trustworthy. It should be in all documents. Rabbi Elazar, who says no way, no how, afilu get isha nami lo, then we shouldn't trust them at all. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who had the middle position, well, idi ichzuk afilu shtar shtarot nami. If they're trusted when it comes to documents, then we should trust them in all documents. And idelo ichzuk afilu get isha nami lo. And if they're not trusted in documents, then we shouldn't even trust them when it comes to a divorce. And if you want to suggest, well, the obvious, which is Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, well, then maybe we'd say, well, they're trustworthy when it comes to signing on get of a woman and shiur, the release of a slave, but they're not trustworthy for monetary documents. Well, it's a bit of a problem because that means that they are trustworthy. And what did he even say? They're even more trustworthy than Jews. Well, if so, then we should allow two witnesses and not just one. And the Mishnah seemed to say only one witness is a Kuti, but the other one's a Jew. So Alama Amar Rabbi Elazar, and why did Rabbi Elazar say, in case you weren't 100% clear about it, Rabbi Elazar said, Rabbi Elazar, not the Tana, Rabbi Elazar the Amora, student of Rabbi Yochanan, lo ichshiru bo ela echad kuti bova. They actually only allowed one Kuti. They didn't allow both witnesses. So if that's the way Rabbi Elazar understands the Mishnah, we're assuming that's the way to read the Mishnah, in which case it doesn't fit with Rashbag because two witnesses should be accepted. So it really doesn't follow any. How can we explain it? Well, La'olam Rabbi Elazar has to match one of them. So the Gemara says, let's explain it according to Rabbi Elazar. How so? Remember, he said they're not trustworthy in general. So how do we believe them? Well, Kigon dechatim Yisrael v'asam. The second signature is signed by a Jew. Moving now to Amud Bet. Di'ilo dekuti chaverha lo machtim le'mekame. The witness never would have signed. In other words, if you have two witnesses and the Jew is signed at the bottom, then we assume that first the Kuti signed. And now Jews won't sign a document if there's a Kuti who's not trustworthy signed above him. So the assumption is that when that second witness came, he saw the Kuti was signed, and he knew he was a trustworthy Kuti because some of the, Rabbi Elazar made a blanket statement about Kutim in general, but it doesn't mean there aren't some that are trustworthy. So he signed it knowing, and that is enough. So now we rely on his signature to verify the 1-4, basically. And that's why it works. So which the Gemara is going to ask the obvious question. Well, then why only get Nashim and Shiur Avadim? Then other shtarot should work as well. Ella. Now, why don't the other shtarot work? They're going to explain why it wouldn't be valid. And then they're going to say, if it's not valid there, why should it be valid in the divorce documents also? And then we're going to be left with a question. Ella, why doesn't it work in shar shtarot? It must be because Amrina, and we could say, Rav Kashavik Laman de Kashish Mine. Maybe he signed second because he left it blank, figuring maybe someone of more importance will come, a more prominent person, to sign on this document, and therefore I'll sign in the second one and leave the first one for the more prominent person. And therefore, the fact that he signed second doesn't prove that the person before him was legitimate, because maybe he just left it blank, and then maybe this Kuti came, and that doesn't prove anything. So therefore, Hachanami, we would say that that's probably why he's not believed in shar shtarot, and therefore, Hachanami, we should say the same thing about again, and we're back to square one. Why would we allow this Kuti signature? So Amara Papa, Zot Omeret, it must be, he says, you can infer from here, Eidei Haget En Chotmim Ze Beloze. it must be that Eidei HaGet, it's unique. When it comes to a get and a shichur of a slave, the release of a slave, the witnesses won't sign one without the other. They have to sign in the presence of each other. And this is a sugya we're going to see later on in the Masechet. My taima, Amar Rav Ashi, gzera mishum kulchem. It's a gzera because of a case of kulchem. If a man says to a group of 10 people, that's the case given in the Gemara, it could be any number of people, I want you to write this get for my wife. So they have to, only one of them writes it, they don't all need to write it, but what he meant is they all need to sign it. Now, what might happen? What might happen is if they sign not in front of the others, and then it could be the woman will get the get without everybody signing on it. No one will really realize, and they'll just write because one signed and two signed and three signed, and then someone just takes the get and gives it, not realizing that more people needed to sign. And then, or not realizing someone gave it to her without realizing that they all needed to sign. Later, the husband comes and says, what, you're divorced based on this get? But this get isn't what I wanted. I said all of them need to sign. They all didn't sign, so it's an invalid get. We never want a situation like that where the woman's divorced and the husband comes back and says, you're not really divorced. And he would be right in this case. So if he says kulchem, they all have to be there and sign one in front of the other so that they all are only going to sign if everyone else is signing, and then we'll only get to her when they're all signed. As a result, they made a gzera that all witnesses can only sign in the presence of the other. Because if they don't make it in all gets, then this kulchem case will end up, and we'll get to her maybe without them all signing. So because of that, get is unique in this way. And that's why we know that if he's signed with a kuti, it's definitely that he knew the kuti was signed, and it's definitely that he's vouching for him by signing. And that's why we can accept it specifically in the divorce document, and the same would hold true for the slave. Now we're going to go back to another. So we finally resolved this Mishna is according to Rabbi Elazar, and it's a case where it's one witness, there's a Jew signed with him, and we then, that validates the fact that this kuti must be a chaver, as they call him, a kuti who keeps halacha. Gufa. Now we're going to go back to the statement that we said earlier, which is, in case you weren't sure about it, even though it seemed pretty clear from the Mishnah, and we'll discuss this in a minute, Amar Rabbi Elazar lo chshiru bo ela ed echad kuti b'vad. They really only allow one ed kuti, not more than one, which we just verified now, right? Where we just explained it based on that makes sense. It's only one. My kamashmalan, but what is Rabbi Elazar telling us? Tanina, it already says so in the Mishnah. Kol get sheyesh lav ed kuti pasul. Anyone who has one witness on a document that's a kuti is disqualified, which, except for get nashin and shakor avadim, which would mean one witness is okay there. But it's only talking about one witness. So they say, well, Rabbi Elazar is adding something, because again, an Amora doesn't need to say something that's clear from a Mishnah. So, if we just had the Mishnah, you would have thought maybe two, but what? Why does it say one? It's to teach you that when we don't accept the Kutim, we don't accept them at all. When we do accept them, we can even accept two. And that's a possible way to read the Mishnah. Rabbi Elazar had to come and tell us that's not the way to read the Mishnah. And then they asked the following, though. Utrelo, two is really no good, but why did we think possibly you might have thought two was good? Well, we still have to reconcile the end of that Mishnah. Hakatani, it says, get isha. There was a case where they brought before Rabban Gamliel in Kfar Otnai a get of a woman, and the Eidim were Kutim. V'yichshir says Eidim, plural. So if Tanakama doesn't hold that two Kuti witnesses is good, well, then how did Rabban Gamliel allow this get? So two possible ways to read it. Amar Abaye, Tanei Edo, change the language of the Mishnah. It really meant one witness. Okay, you wouldn't have to only change the word Edo. You would have to have Haya, not instead of Hayu Edav Edei Kutim, Haya Edo Ed Kuti. You'd have to change a few words, 4 words. Rava Amar Le'olam Trei. Rava is going to keep the version that we have of the Mishnah and explain it. Rabban Gamliel Miflag Palik. Rabban Gamliel disagrees with Tanakama. Tanakama said only one. Rabban Gamliel says even 2. The Chisur Machasr V'Hachi Katani. And then you have to say the Mishnah is missing words. This is one of the methods that we use of explaining a Mishnah. If a Mishnah doesn't make sense, we can add words. Here are the words we're adding. Rabban Gamliel Machshir B'Shnayim. Okay, as opposed to Tanakama who said only 1. Rabban Gamliel now comes and says 2 is okay. Uma said Nami, and then they bring the case to prove Rabban Gamliel disagrees, because it was a case where Rabban Gamliel Kfar Otnai get isha v'yu edav edei kutim v'yichshir. So that basically comes to prove Rabban Gamliel. New Mishnah, third difference, right, between get nashim shakor avadim and other shtarot. and ways that get nashim and shekor avadim are similar. That come out from a court of a Gentile court, even though Gentiles are signed on it, it's all fine. Other than our two cases, the get isha and the shekor eved. So whereas Kuti worked because you had the Jews signed with the Kuti, or even according to Rabban Gamliel, they're fully trustworthy in this case, which we didn't really explain who Rabban Gamliel holds by, according to Rava. But on the other hand, right, maybe he has his own approach. On the other hand, we have Ovdei Kochavim, where from a Gentile court, we don't accept get or shekor eved at all, whereas we do accept it, even though the signatures are Gentiles. If it came out of their court, we accept it when it comes to monetary documents. Rabbi Shimon disagrees and says, Af elu ksherim, even get isha and shekor eved work, which we're going to have to see why. The problem is only when they're not done in a court. You just have Gentile signatures, that's not going to work. So first the Gemara says, kapasik v'tani. It seems to make a very clear distinction. Get isha and shekor eved on one side, all other shtarot on the other, anything monetary. Loshna mechef, loshna matana. It doesn't matter if it's a sale or if it's a gift. Now, why should it matter? Well, the Gemara is going to say, Bishma, I understand mechef, a sale. Because when you give them money, that makes the acquisition. The shtar, the shtar is just a document proving what happened. It's just a proof. It's not, the shtar is not important in and of itself. It just proves the transaction that happened. Now, we can assume that if it came out of a Gentile court and they wrote the following happened, so-and-so paid money to so-and-so, sold their property. Well, if they really didn't give the money, and then it's really not a sale, their reputation is on the line. This court wouldn't have written, this person sold their house to so-and-so without there being an actual sale, that someone actually did it. Because if the document is just proving what happened, they wouldn't write that. If it weren't true, it would make them look bad. If it turned out they lied, the court would be in big trouble. But Elab Matana, because there it's just the shtar is proving what actually transpired. But when it comes to a gift, it's very different. But Maikakane, how do you acquire a gift? It's just on paper, right? If I give my house to my children, right, I gift it to them. I have to do it with a document. I can't just give it to them. That's not enough. I have to have a document, and that document makes the sale. Rashi says it in the words, it's by the document that the deed, right, that the action happens. Without the document, it's nothing. So if the document is everything, because there was no money that transferred hands, then we have more of a problem. Because in this case, so again, Ela matana b'maikakane, with what is it acquired? La b'haishtara, is it not that it's acquired with the document? And this document that's signed by Gentiles is just a piece of like a broken shard. It's nothing. It's really has no meaning to it whatsoever because it's a document signed by Gentiles, which in our law doesn't hold anything, right? It only holds something if it's when the case where it's verifying that an action happened, it can verify because that's their reputation on the line. But just to say I gave this as a gift, they could be lying. Amar Shmuel, so Shmuel answers, dina de malchuta dina. We have this principle that the law of the land is the law. And therefore, basically, we're going to say, we have to keep the laws of the land. So if their court rules that this is a gift, that could count as a gift, that's sufficient. Okay, that's what we do that. We keep the rule of the land. There's a very important halacha that Shmuel says. It comes up in a few other sugyot. This isn't the main one, but it's a very important concept that he says, that we keep the law of the land, has all sorts of ramifications for paying taxes and all sorts of other things. Ibai dema. Alternatively, you could say, Tene chutz mi kigitei nashim. We made a very clear distinction. We said, kitei nashim and shechur avadim on one side, everything else, including any kind of sale, gift, any kind of monetary thing on the other side. Hans, this suggestion of the Gemara, and says maybe what it means is anything that's like Gittin nashim, meaning we're going to distinguish between a shtar that's just a proof of some action having taken place, whereas sale will go on one side, get nashim on the other, versus matana, a gift, which is more like a get isha, where the get is what makes the transaction happen. That we can't rely on Gentiles for that. Likewise, the gift, since the shtar, the document is everything, we can't use that. And then matana actually goes to the other side. Okay, so we have two possible ways of explaining. Last section for today, Rabbi Shimon omer af elu ksherim v'hala b'nei kritut nini. How could he allow a Gentile court releasing a get for, giving a get to the woman and like signing on the document? That makes no sense. A get has to be signed by someone who's part of this world of being able to do kritu. There is no such thing as a get for a Gentile. They have their own divorce documents, but not a get. So they're not part of this world. So now they say, well, Amar Rabbi Zera, Yarad Rabbi Shimon l'shitato shel Rabbi Elazar, Amar Edei Mesira Karte. What do we say? We keep going back to this Rabbi Elazar and Edei Mesira. Told you we'd be coming back to this many times in the Masechet. Basically, Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Elazar that Edei Mesira Karte, the signatures are not important at all. We rely on the witnesses that saw the document being given to her. The signatures are super unimportant, okay? But what does the Gemara ask? The question, we talked about this a while ago, right, about a week ago. V'hama Rabbi Abba modeh Rabbi Elazar b'mezuyach mitocho shu pasul. But wait, doesn't Rabbi Elazar agree that once it has signatures, they have to be kosher? And these signatures are definitely not kosher signatures, they're Gentiles. To which they answered, now what's the problem? Let's think about it, and then we'll get to the answer. The problem is they were really worried that maybe they'll rely, instead of Edei Mesira, since they have witnesses signed on the document, they might rely on those witnesses. And if the witnesses are disqualified, that will be a problem. So that's why he disqualifies the get if there's non-kosher witnesses, because maybe by accident people will rely on them. Is there a concern of that in this case? Well, it just sort of depends. The Gemara says, what is the case they're talking about here? When they're clear Gentile names. If there's names of Gentiles that could be regular names of Jews also. And then there's names of Gentiles that only Gentiles have those names. Okay? If it's a clear Gentile name, which the Gemara is going to ask, we'll get to that tomorrow's daf, which is what is Shemot Mufakim that are clear Gentile names. But if they're clear Gentile names, the Jews don't have those names. Right? And it's very interesting because Jews often have names that are also Gentile names. Right? More so than Gentiles have Jewish names, although also depends, right? Biblical names, etc. But also, if they're names that it's clear they're Gentiles, nobody's going to rely on them. Nobody's going to think, let's rely on these witnesses. They're obviously going to go find the Edei Mesira, and therefore there's no issue. I'll give you a story about this because it's just too good to pass up, and I really, literally just heard it. My father was telling me that there was someone who was doing work in his house. His name was Christian, obviously a non-Jewish name, and the person said it was getting close to Shabbat. My father tried to explain to him there's this thing, and I'm going to need you to leave before then. And the guy said, "Oh, Shabbos." My father looks at him, "Christian, what do you know about Shabbos?" And he said, "Oh, I grew up in Argentina, and the best school there was the Jewish school, and I went to the Jewish school, and I know about Shabbos, and knew about all these things. He dated an Orthodox woman." Anyway, a very funny story. So the point being that, right, as soon as he knew the name Christian, he knew the person wasn't Jewish for sure. It happens that the person knew about Shabbos, but he obviously wasn't Jewish. So in those cases, right, there's no way you're going to assume the person's Jewish. So there you have this distinction. Okay, so with that, we finished our daf. Let's just go do a quick review of where we started. We're trying to figure out why Lishma wasn't on the list of the differences there, of those cases. And then we said, Lishma isn't there because, again, according to Rava only, what was the question? It's according to Rabbi was there, because that was the whole thing of B'fanai Nechtav. If you hold like Rava, it was again really a question on Rava. Why isn't Lishma there? And we ended up trying to say, well, in the end, it's things that have to do with Kiddush that are not true for Kiddushin. Those are the things that are on that list, as opposed to things that happen in Kiddushin also, and Lishma is also relevant for Kiddushin. Okay, that, by the way, I forgot to mention, comes from this pasuk in the divorce, the Yatzami Beitov V'ayta Ishachel. And they say whatever's true for Yitzia is true for Havaya. Havaya is Kiddushin. She goes and marries someone else. So they learn from there that also the Kiddushin has to be, if you write a shtar Kiddushin, it has to be written for him and for her and not used by, document taken from someone else. Okay, then we had the next case, which really we already saw in the Bright, about the Eid Kuti. We tried to say, why is an Eid Kuti? According to who does this go? We finally figured out it holds like Rabbi Elazar. And then, right, with that, with explaining that, it's in the case, first we thought, right, that he signs with another Jew, and then we could assume they signed together, and that gives it its validity. Then we wanted to explain why Rabbi Elazar had to tell us there was only Eid Echad, and then we had to figure out how Rabban Gamliel worked in with that. And two ways of reading it: either Rabban Gamliel's story supports Rabbi Elazar, or it disagrees and says actually two Kutim is actually okay. Then we talked about the erkaot of the Gentiles and why this would work and how it would work for a sale and also for a gift, or maybe it doesn't work for a gift and maybe gift is on the other side with the get. And why it doesn't work, right? We talked about that. And then we had this Rabbi Shimon opinion and we tried to figure out why. And then we said it must be Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Elazar, and therefore, even if Gentiles are signed, it actually works even for a get. That's it for today. Stop wishing everybody a Chag Sameach and a Shabbat Shalom.